This year, I enrolled in a certificate program at Westchester Community College on the topic of 3D modeling and 3D animation. One of our modeling assignments was to choose a photo of a room and to make a model of all of the things we would see in the photo. So this video is about a small piece of that project. In this small piece of the project, I focused on the hanging laundry rack, which you will see in the upper left corner of this photo. By the way, this is a screenshot from a YouTube video from the channel Living Big in a Tiny House, and it relates to an octagonal treehouse that is listed on Airbnb. So that's what you're seeing here in front of you. This is a cropped version of that laundry rack. And it's probably not that good an idea for me to have started this project with items that were in the corners of the view. But somehow that's how my mind works, to focus on the periphery rather than the center. And this rack caught my attention because at first I couldn't figure out what it was. And later I realized that when I was an exchange student in France, we did have a hanging laundry rack in the apartment in my host family's residence in Paris. It wasn't this one, but we did have one. So there was a sort of familiarity about it. And I do think that having a ceiling hanging laundry rack is an interesting use of space, although I don't have one in my own home. The original photograph of this laundry rack wasn't very clear. So I considered myself very fortunate to have found the website where they sell these things. It's called Pulley Made, and they had all kinds of more detailed photos of this rack, so I got a much better one to look at, although it's not perfect, but still I got a much clearer idea of how the rack really looked and how it worked. I had the idea also that the length of the laths in this rack might give me clear dimensions of my room. However, it turned out that they sell the rack with multiple lath lengths, so that wasn't dispositive. Now, I'm a baby Maya student, so I really had no idea how I was going to do this rack. And I learned online that you could take a silhouette photo and extrude it into geometry in Maya. So I used Photoshop to create this image, which I'm unfortunately not seeing very clearly in iMovie. It is a silhouette of the rack, but iMovie is showing the transparent background as black, which isn't very helpful. Maybe I can put something under it. I'm not sure. Anyway, I did import this image into Maya. Actually, I tried several different times, and I just really wasn't able to get a very good silhouette using Photoshop. That was the software I was trying to use to create a silhouette. I did see that online there was software to create silhouettes specifically, and there must be a way to do it in Photoshop, but I didn't figure it out. What I tried to do in Photoshop was edit out the laths and substitute in with a black paintbrush the parts of the rack that had been obscured by the laths in my reference photo from the Pulley Made website. And unfortunately, that just didn't seem to come up with a very good silhouette. And I erased the background and everything. And I tried several times, and each of these structures that you're seeing on your screen was an attempt to extrude from a version of my photoshopped image. And as you can see, that not all the holes came through and they look really awkward. And I decided, not to mention that the mesh was horrible, that this really wasn't working. So I called these my Frankenstein's monster version of the laundry rack frame. So my next attempt was to create a curve around the outside of part of the laundry rack frame, and then sweep mesh the curve, and then make curves around the vertical pieces and sweep mesh those, and then try to sort of make them look like they were part of the same structure, although they were really separate geometry. And I didn't go too far with this because I had this vague feeling that I was doing the wrong thing, and I wanted to ask the professor what the correct way was to proceed. So what the professor felt I should do was to start as I had started, sweeping a mesh around a curve, but then instead of making separate geometry to do the vertical pieces, I should do a bridge function in Maya to bridge the faces. So I did try this, and this is half of a laundry rack frame, and when I got to this point I thought, well, this is pretty good, I like this. But then I had to try to do the other half and the central part, and that turned out to be much more difficult. So this shows the mesh that I came up with around the neck, below the ring at the top of the frame, and I was trying to use the bridge function still, and I don't know why I've been allergic to extrusion in Maya, but the professor really prefers extrusion. But I was doing the bridging still, and I end up with a lot of messy stuff here. So here was the whole frame, and you can see I've done a mesh cleanup selection here where the n-gons are showing up in various little places. But the professor said he really didn't want me to spend time trying to fix this because it isn't that visible in the room, and I shouldn't have been working on it in the first place, and I should do the stuff in the center of the room. But, of course, I have not been really obedient towards this professor. The course isn't graded, and I really wanted to try to figure out how to do this better. And for whatever reason, I was just intrigued with this laundry rack. Now, I'm not making a lot of progress on my room. I don't have nearly as many assets in my room as other people do because I do things like this and just go back and edit something that doesn't really even show. But that's how I am. So here is a version that I redid where the mesh is somewhat cleaner. And I also learned some interesting things about extrusion and how to make the lines in the mesh straight. I discovered that if I selected a line of points and then used the Maya translate function, which is the W hotkey, and the snap to grid option up there on the top of the window, and then move the line of points in two perpendicular directions, snapping to grid, then they would get straight. And then I could turn off snap to grid and move them back into the frame. So I was able to straighten out the lines in the central mesh. And I'm pleased to say that when I ran a mesh cleanup with the selection of n-sided shapes option rather than the cleanup option, just the selection option, I didn't find any n-gons in this one. Oh, what a relief. Unfortunately, the ring on top is not perfectly circular because I made this by uniting two halves, and somehow when they came together I never really got it quite circular. But I feel better about it than I did about the previous one, and it isn't even that visible. But I felt that I learned a lot from it. So this is a rendered view of my room as I have it now. And there's a lot more to this render view than just the laundry rack, although you can dimly see the laundry rack in the upper left corner, and you can see that I haven't modeled all of the assets that are in the room yet. And moreover, I haven't figured out how to smooth that round table. It still looks octagonal. I thought I smoothed it, but it isn't. And there's more about these render views on my WordPress blog, but I just wanted to show you where I am in this video. Obviously not finished.